TAS sports competitions are the focus of the associated schools. These sporting competitions are organised for 8 co-educational independent high schools in Brisbane, Australia. And let me tell you, as high school sports competitions go, this one's definitely worth watching. Hey everybody, I'm Chris. Welcome to episode 3 of TAS Sport. It's worth watching. It's a podcast covering all things that are TAS Sport. Last week we were on hiatus because we didn't have any games played. All schools called off their TAS and junior TAS matches due to the uncertainty surrounding the spread of COVID-19 at the time of those games. But most school matches went ahead this week, which is good. So let's get into this week's results by first diving into our girls volleyball with this week's dig, set and spike. Righto, here we go with girls volleyball. We're going to highlight games where most games that were hard fought with 2-1 wins in our dig section. And then we will set the ball. We'll highlight games where there were a few 2-1 wins and a few 3-0 wins. And then our spike will point out where teams have smashed the ball well over the net and come away with wins of 3-0. So what are the dig, sets and spikes from last week's girls volleyball? Here's the serve. Let's dig that serve. The toughest competition of last weekend's games was by far our firsts competition, with St John's and St Columban's unable to take the court due to COVID uncertainty in one of their communities. It left us with 3 games, and each of them were hotly contested. Cannon Hill overcame Ormiston 3-1. JPC won their game against St Paul's by 2-1, and Canterbury were able to squeak past Westmac 3-2, with only a few points separating the two teams in that final set. Our Year 7 games also qualify for the dig this week, with one game being washed out, and left both Canterbury and Ormiston coming away with 2-1 wins over Westmac and Chack, respectively. Now that ball's been dug out, so let's set it. And our set is moving on to our Year 8 and 9 competitions and our seconds competition as well, where they all had some close games with 1 or 2 that were 3-0 wins. We're going to start off, though, with our supplementary competition. So we saw in the seniors, Westmac Navy and Canterbury Navy win 3-0, while St Paul's Green and Chack 10 Red had close wins. In the junior supplementary competition, Ormiston's 8 Blue team had a close win over Chack, and their 7 Blue team had a 3-0 win, also over Chack. In our seconds competition, Westmac won narrowly, while Cannon Hill and St Paul's both had good wins. In Year 9, St Paul's had a good win over JPC, but Canterbury and Ormiston had to fight hard for their 2-1 wins over Westmac and Chack. And finally, in the set component of our results this week, in Year 8, we had one game washed out. Canterbury had a good win, and Cannon Hill had to work hard to beat Ormiston 2-1. Finally, that brings us to the spike, and only one age group really fits this competition this time around. All games were won 3-0, and that's our Year 10 competition, where Canterbury and Cannon Hill overcame Westmac and Ormiston with 3-0 wins. Now that's our quick recap of this week's volleyball results. What caught the eye in football? Well, what caught my eye in football this week was the number of games that were hotly contested. We had a couple of draws, but plenty of games where the scores were pretty tight. Westmac's first had a good win, along with Ormiston and JPC's firsts. In our seconds competition, JPC had a big win over St Paul's, while Cannon Hill beat Ormiston and Westmac had a close-fought win over Canterbury. In our Year 10s, JPC and Chack had big wins, while Canterbury had a closely fought win over Westmac. And in Year 9, Westmac had a big win. St Paul's scored 8 goals, but JPC were also on the attack themselves and made that game a pretty close affair. And finally, Ormiston won a close one against Chack. In Year 8, Ormiston won 4-0, while JPC squeezed past St Paul's by 1 goal, and Westmac and Canterbury fought out a 3-all draw. Finally, in Year 7, Ormiston had a big win. Westmac beat Canterbury in a reasonably close match, and St Paul's and JPC fought out a 3-all draw. It's a shame it's been such a short season, but being able to play in the wet meant that most of our footballers got in a full 3-game season. Let's get into a fast break for basketball. All right, our fast break for basketball. We're going to throw into our supplementary competitions where we saw wins to CHAC's 9 blue and red teams against Ormiston. And in the supplementary junior competition, CHAC's Year 8 red team won, as did their 7 blue team, and the 7 red teams against Ormiston. We passed the ball up to court to Year 7, where we only had one result. JPC and St. Paul's were washed out, but CHAC won convincingly over Ormiston. Moving on to Year 8, JPC beat St. Paul's, and in 2 very closely fought matches, CHAC beat Ormiston by just 1 point, and Westpac and Canterbury fought out a 25-all draw. We passed the ball up the court to Year 9. Again, JPC and St. Paul's were washed out, but Ormiston and Canterbury both had pretty convincing wins. And those convincing wins repeated in Year 10, where Canterbury, CHAC and JPC all scored well in their respective games. The Year 10s passed the ball into the keyway for the firsts and seconds. Westpac won well in their seconds game against Canterbury, and Ormiston squeaked past Cannon Hill by just 1 point, 22-21. The ball goes into the firsts, go up for a layup, where JPC beat St. Paul's by just 2 points. Ormiston and Canterbury won their games to round out our basketball wrap-up. I will say that people I've spoken to about basketball since last weekend made note that all of the teams were playing much better basketball than when the season first started. It's a shame we're in the situation where we need to cut that season short as students start to get into their groove. Well, that's our quick recap of last week's results, and now a look at what's transpired in Girls Touch. Okay, in Girls Touch last weekend, the 8th of August, our supplementary games were mixed around a bit after we had one team withdraw. So we had teams with different age groups playing against each other so that we missed out on a bye. And most of those younger teams performed pretty well. Westmac's Year 8 particularly, where they beat Canterbury's Year 10 team, and Cannon Hill and Canterbury's Year 8 teams also won their games, as did Ormiston's Year 7 blue team with a win over CHAC. We work our way up the grades, and in Year 7, Westmac, Cannon Hill and St. Paul's all had good wins, and in Year 8, Canterbury and Cannon Hill won well, while JPC beat St. Paul's by just 1 try. In Year 9, Canterbury and JPC won closer matches, but Cannon Hill beat Ormiston 5-0. Cannon Hill and JPC repeated dominant performances in Year 10, but Westmac and Canterbury fought out a 2-all draw. And that brings us to our open games, where in the seconds, St. Paul's and Canterbury both won by just 2 tries, while Ormiston and Cannon Hill couldn't be split with a 4-all draw. Westmac and Canterbury in the first had to fight out a draw, a 3-all result, while Ormiston beat Cannon Hill and St. Paul's had a big win over JPC. That's our quick recap of our touch results from last weekend. Let's have a look forward to see what's coming up. Okay, this weekend we're going to see the running of our TAS cross-country championships. Due to the COVID-19, we have some restrictions around participation and attendance at these events. We'll run our junior TAS carnival on Thursday of this week and ask that there be no spectators at this event. It takes place on a school day, and we're trying to make it as normal as possible within the safety parameters that we need to put in place. We've had to limit the number of runners to a few less than usual, and as schools will be busing their teams into the venue, having no spectators will allow all of our schools to bring as many of their team runners as possible. Our TAS Carnival will take place on Friday, August the 14th at St. Paul's School. As this day is a public holiday for schools within Brisbane area and a student-free day for some of our other schools outside the Brisbane area, we've allowed 1 spectator per participant in a separate viewing area. Having 1 spectator with each participant means that students can be transported via private transport, which will be required in a number of circumstances. We'll also have a break in the middle of that carnival to ensure that runners and spectators from our earlier events have time to clear the course and viewing areas before we start the remainder of the carnival. And that'll make sure that we remain underneath the required numbers that we need. Good luck to everybody taking part. It'll certainly be worth watching. It's a shame that we can't let people in to see what transpires. We'll make all of our results available online through the TAS website. So apart from cross-country, there'll be no TAS Sport this weekend. I'll be back in next week just to give you a quick wrap-up of what had transpired in our cross-country carnivals. And then we'll begin again with our Term 2 sports with our first episode after rugby, netball, hockey and tennis, which begins on August 22nd. Well, that brings us to the end of our podcast for this week. If you're keen to be involved with TAS Sport, It's Worth Watching, let us know. You could stand in as my offsider for a week, or maybe have a particular story to tell. You could be my special interview for that week. Otherwise, you could hit us up on the TAS Facebook or Instagram pages to let us know that you're keen, and maybe something about why we should be chatting to you. That's it from us this week. You've been listening to TAS Sport, It's Worth Watching. I'm your host Chris, signing off for this week.